Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Pickens Thompson. Uh, Many times I go places, different places I go, might be at the airport or at a restaurant, out of town, and in casual conversation, people sometimes will ask where I'm from. I'll let them know that I'm from Chicago, and I've grown up there and lived there all my life. A lot of times they'll go into asking like, "Hey, what's going on in Chicago?" Well, all the shootings and I see this and that. And to keep things simple, oftentimes I'll just say, "Hey, it's just the media. It's the way the media portrays things, or it's the same that goes on everywhere." But the truth of the matter is, I just give them that short answer to try to keep the conversation down, and it gets way much deeper, as to the reasons why. So today I'm going to give you guys a brief history of what's going on in Chicago by telling you history of the events that have led up to today, especially concerning African Americans in the city. Because the reason why I highlight African Americans is because many times we are the subject of, they try to place the blame on, this group, our group, as African Americans. And I'll give you a brief reason as to why things may be the way they are. So way back in the mid 20th century, the beginning to the mid 20th century, the Great Migration occurred. And what that is people from the South were escaping those southern states, which Jim Crow and, different laws and policies were in place that basically was undesirable living conditions for this certain group of people as us African Americans. So in search of a better life, we migrated to northern metropolises such as Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, New York. Some people went to LA, different places that people went because of the industrialization that was happening, and many jobs were available, and people of color were able to obtain upward mobility. In an article called "Examining Reasons for Chicago Violence" by NPR, they highlighted how beginning in those times during the Great Migration, when people came to Chicago, they were often limited to live in certain areas of the city only, such as Inglewood on the south side, Garfield Park on the west side, and a little bit later, African Americans were able to move into the Austin neighborhood, which is on the west side. Many places were still not allowed, like Oak Park and Pullman and Bridgeport, Canaryville. A lot of places were still off limits to African Americans. The banks set up policies, called redlining, which basically would outline areas in which people would be able to live, purchase property or rent property even. And also they went as far as the bank would not even give you a loan if you were of certain ethnicity to live in this area, let alone. So this red line is kind of like blocking people out, a policy put in place to basically keep people outside these lines, color lines, basically, class lines, race lines. And that still carries over to today. So when the people got here from Chicago, a lot of people, my father included, my grandmother came first. My father came from Alabama when he graduated high school in 1970. And, people were able to obtain that upward mobility, and they were able to get their families out of poverty and live a better life than that was afforded to them in the Jim Crow South. So basically, the people get here. Shortly thereafter, somewhere in there, in the 40s, the FHA, this is according to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, in an article called What We Do. It's from 2002, also, in case you wanted to go look it up. They detailed how the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority Association, put in place these project buildings or a plan to build these project buildings. And they gave each specific state jurisdiction over how and where they would build these. And specifically in Chicago, I'm familiar with, where we're talking about here today. The mayor at the time, Mayor Daley, decided to build, these sprawling vertical complexes all across the city in these areas where the African Americans were sanctioned to live or allowed to live, and basically just house them on top of each other so that we won't have to have the urban sprawl, across the city, and just keep them contained to one area. This is done in order to try to basically keep people grouped. There may be programs available in this area that aren't available in this area. And, it gets kind of crazy, but that's what happened during those times. So shortly thereafter, a lot of these jobs that people were able to get in industry, factories, warehouses, steel mills, and things of that nature, those jobs, they got incentive from other places to move their business to other places. And in turn, a lot of people in these areas, African Americans, were left without jobs, because these are people straight out of the cotton fields and sharecroppers from the South, people with little to no education at all, no training, except maybe how to work with their hands and whatnot. So this left a big gap, and it left a disparity for people like that. And were without jobs. The projects that they built for low-income families became run down, and the maintenance fund for the buildings was, depleted, or whatever, whatever that happened. So it left a huge void in opportunities available to the adults who have to raise these children. Also, dealing with the Federal Housing Authority plan for the projects, low income, one of the requirements, incentives, I'll say, is they will have little to no rent payments for people who were single mothers. Basically, if you don't have a father in the household, we'll reward you. If you don't have a male in the household, we'll reward you with, having to pay little to no rent, and, for as sick as it may seem, a lot of people look toward that, and it alienated a lot of male role models and fathers out of the home, and that was a big influence on, upbringing and the grounding and the rooting of the next generation. Not to get too far ahead of myself, the fathers who we're talking about, who were, and for lack of a better term, alienated, they also, hard for them, I'm sure, trying to find a way to pull their families out, of poverty when, the opportunities were scarce. According to Urban Poverty in Chicago, many of the children who had to grow up in the projects, govern themselves a lot of times, because, your mom's 16 stories high, or maybe she's working to try to keep the lights on in the place, and kids are governing themselves. Kids are making rules amongst themselves, and that can't be good at all. So let's go. This went on for about approximately 30 or 40 years. The blight of the projects, it was well documented all over news, national news, pretty sure probably international news. A lot of times the police were scared to come into these places. The lawlessness prevailed. So somewhere around 1998, this is also according to Examining Reasons for Chicago Violence from the NPR. Around 1998, finally a plan was developed by the city council and the federal government to go ahead and dismantle those projects in Chicago. A lot of people didn't want to go, even though the poverty and the crime and, the filth, how everything was. A lot of people didn't want to move because that's all they knew. That's all that they had. That's what they call home. But the projects were demolished and a lot of people were moved away into other communities, which caused a lot of backlash and uproar, because it's like, when people feel like you're coming into their space, people are very territorial. That's another huge reason for, I believe, why there's so much, drama in Chicago, problems going on with different groups in different neighborhoods, because everybody's being squeezed into these small spaces with little to no opportunities available to them. And when people are not, when people have not a lot of opportunities, don't have many opportunities available, they adapt to their environment. They turn to survival. And a person who's in survival mode is not thinking as logical or as rational as a person who's, not in survival mode and able to live a conscious, regular life. So, in closing, everything that's happening in Chicago is happening because of all of the events and policies that were set up prior to now. It may have been designed to work this way. It may not have. You make that inference on your own. But all of these things have influenced what Chicago is today. And, that's really what I want to tell people. That's the gist of what I want to tell people when they ask what's going on in Chicago. I believe that if we understand the history of what's happened and, how it's happened, that will help us in turn understand why it is the way it is today. So thank you guys for listening. I hope that I've provided you with a lot of information, and thank you so much. Have a great day.